So we understand that as we grow up, we change, we evolve, and we have so many different ways we can look at our relationship with God in the way that we watch ourselves interact in this world and the different phases that we go through our lives. And one of the aspects is this idea of spiritually growth, and that, we're exhorted not to stay the same as we were. Paul says in Ephesians chapter 4, 13 through 14, in trying to tell them to reach a level of maturity, to grow up, and not to keep that simplicity of mind, but have that knowledge and grow. And so that you're not going to remain as a child. You can't stay that way. That's a progression spiritually, and we know that we can't stay there. And we always tell people, you see people at different levels, and sometimes you see someone that's older as a Christian, that's been a Christian for years, and you look at them and you go, well, they're still kind of a babe in Christ in their knowledge, and kind of get a little frustrated, like, well, they need to grow up. And so we have that exhortation spiritually that we need to grow up and not act as a child anymore. And what does that mean? When we talk about, spiritually, that a person acts as a child, is that, there's an innocence, but there's also a vulnerability. There's an aspect of that spiritually that we cannot expect ourselves to be safe spiritually if we remain immature as a child. But on the other side, we see that where Jesus, in his ministry, that children were something very important. And it was very kind of confusing because to the apostles and to people that, were adults, we look at children as they're just kind of noisy. This morning, one of the first things I noticed is John and Tina's kids aren't here this morning. And, your clan, the kids aren't there, and you get that noise. And for a long time, when we had COVID, it was so quiet in here. It was unnerving. And then when you have children and you hear, it's like, what's that noise, And I remember raising my kids here, and people would look around and, oh, man, those kids make a lot of noise, and they're all about us. And so there's a part where it's like you're hindering something important. The little rascals are running around and causing disturbance while I'm trying to have a spiritually discussion and with adults. And there's kind of that reflection in the gospel where you see that you don't hear a lot about the children except for a very important point where Jesus brings this up. And I can see where these apostles are so driven and so focused on, they've got the Son of God, they've got the Messiah, and they're against the world. The whole world is against them. They're fighting against the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and everybody. And they got to get this word out. We need to get his voice out there to those that can make a difference, because his kingdom is coming in. It's coming with power. And then all of a sudden, these little kids are like scurrying around and making noise and everything. And I can see Peter going, come on, let's get the kids out of the auditorium. Let's get them out. I'm just saying that jokingly. But, let's get them out of here because, we got something important going on in here. And I've had that sometimes where I'll see parents with children, and they're like, Johnny, can't you keep that, shh, just sit there. And I'm like, you know what? I don't, please. I love to hear that. I do. And I know the struggle I had as a parent, because I spent, most of my time, well, not anymore because I've been preaching long, but trying to raise my kids, and they're sitting there making noise and everything, thinking that it's so important to keep them silent. It's not important. And, and that's what we find here, is this importance of God's word and getting this kingdom established and brought in and getting the leaders to submit to this Messiah, that we forgot something, that Jesus stops. It's like right in the middle of them trying to calm down to have his sermon. And these children are scurrying around and being distracting. And Peter, you can see him just kind of, let's get these kids out of here. And what does Jesus do? He stops and he teaches something very important. It's not about etiquette in an assembly. It's not about how to necessarily treat children. But it's something spiritual that a lot of times we forget the deep meaning of that. But we see in Mark 10, 13 through 16, and they were bringing children to him that they might touch them, and the disciples rebuked them. But when Jesus saw it, he was indignant, and he said to them, let the children come to me. Do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of God. A lot of times we think, well, why? Are they going to really understand and comprehend that deep meaning that you're going to reveal? Well, what is that? Children are just, again, a distraction. He says, truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it. And he took them in his arms and he blessed them, laying his hands on them. He did right the opposite. And they're sitting there going, we want wisdom. We want this truth coming from you. I mean, he's bringing this lesson and saying, wait a minute. There's something here that you need to understand if you're going to want to be a part of this kingdom. And a child in the kingdom, sometimes we think, well, when they grow up, they'll be a part of it. But until then, let's just keep them silent. Let's just keep them away. And they're missing it because they thought about this physical kingdom. That's all they could think about. But what he's talking about, and he says this, and he says about this idea of the heart of a child. And so we kind of, we get this idea of spiritually, we need to grow up and not remain as a child because of the dangers in it. But yet at the same time, then he says, you need to have the heart of a child. And when you think about a child and the innocence of a child, and you watch them, now I'm not talking about every child, but overall, I want you to just think about children and the way they play and the way they interact with each other. And I think about the idea that when we came into this world, God gave us that spirit. And it was pure, wasn't it? It was innocent. It wasn't exposed. It hadn't been hurt. It hadn't seen things that are ugly and defiling. Just as purity as we come into this world. And then the world what does it do to us? It corrupts us. Just by the pure existence of living. Unless you live on an island all by yourself and you don't ever hear anything from anything outside of that little island in a remote area, you're going to see things. And you're going to see behaviors and you're going to be influenced by them. And then it's like a spiritual downhill. It just changes us. And we're never the same. And what is God trying to do? God's trying to bring us back into that spirit of a child to bring us home. And it's like this full circle of life. He's given us, kind of sounds echoey, doesn't it? The audio just got a little echo. Let me check, make sure this thing's off. Okay, it's off. And so we have this kind of full circle where we are given the Spirit by God that's pure and innocent, and He's going to bring us home. And so the likeness is something that's important. It's in the middle. Could you turn it down just a little bit? We got a little echo. We have this corruption that goes on with us. And so what do we see in children? We see this innocence that comes in, and there's nothing more upsetting and disturbing than to look at what happens to children. And I tell you, if there's one thing, no matter what you are, whether you believe in a God or not, if you're an atheist, it doesn't matter. But when we see the things that society is doing to children, it disturbs us to our core, doesn't it? And the human trafficking of children, what is going on? I mean, it is the sickest. And I really do believe that Satan is active and he's alive in this world. And if one thing that he's going to try to do is destroy purity. And what better way to do it than to destroy the vulnerable and the innocent? Taking that innocence away from children. And what does it do when you do that? You take them away from God. And I don't know how many people that I've run across, and you've probably run across, that have had horrific childhood experiences that has shaped them to where now they're hardened against God, aren't they? They're hardened against God because what do they say? How could a God that is all loving and all powerful, can do anything He wants, allow such vile things to happen to me when I was a child? And Satan goes, tick, one more. And so that is the problem we see, is that this attack on them. And so the heart of a child. And he tells us that unless we become as one, that we cannot be a part of the kingdom. He said, truly I say to you, unless you turn Turning is kind of that repenting. Repenting means going back to, it's almost like going back spiritually to the way you came into this world. And having some of those essence and those characteristics, right? You will never enter the kingdom of heaven. That, the more I looked at that, and the reason what triggered this sermon, honestly, was because of some very disturbing things that I've seen happening in America. In the sexualization of children, the clothing. When my little granddaughter cannot go to a store and buy clothes that are decent, and I didn't believe it because all I ever raised was 3 sons, and it was through Suzanne and other moms who were saying, you ought to see the clothes that they sell as if it's normal. And so it opened my eyes to start looking at it and just, I'm serious, go to the little girls' department and look at those clothes. And the stuff that we're putting our children in, you can't buy stuff. And what does modesty mean anymore? And so then we're shocked when they become teenagers and they're half naked. Why? They've been half naked since they were 4 years old. They go from a diaper to something that's not even much more, and then they grow into puberty, and they're still dressed that way. And that's what's going on. We are automatically doing this to our children. And he says that if we don't look at that as a danger spiritually, that we don't try to bring ourselves back, we, as Christians, can be a part of it. So yeah, we want to grow mature, knowledge-wise, but there's an aspect of this that we need to remind ourselves as Christians that we need to have those innocent, pure attributes that a child has. And another picture that a lot of times people miss is the way that the prophet Isaiah, in describing this new kingdom that's coming, was a very, very unique situation that most people, when they heard it, when Isaiah said it, and then later on, you can see that as it was being taught again, because again, they're looking for a physical kingdom. But look at this, what Isaiah says in 11:6. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fatted calf together, and a little child shall lead them. Now, who wants to put their trust in a little child leading you on a field trip? Say, okay, we're going to go on a camping trip and you're in charge. You say, no. They don't even know, what type of food to bring, and, do they need to bring a compass, or, you plan something, you don't put a little child in charge of it. You see how hard that would be? If you're saying you're going to have a child lead the kingdom, but this whole picture here is about the diversity, the uniqueness of this new kingdom that was in opposition to every kingdom that they had witnessed and seen on this physical world. And that's the power of this kingdom that was going to make it invincible, that nobody was ever going to be able to destroy it. Because those that were a part of it, that were leading this, were going to be those with the heart of a child. And that it was going to bring in diverse cultures. It was going to bring in the Greeks, the Ethiopians, the Indians, the Romanians, everybody. It wasn't going to be like it used to be, that cultures were so isolated and that they hated others. And no matter what race, creed, religion you were going to be able to come together and unite like the lion and the lamb would be together. That's not something normal, is it? No. Usually the lion eats the lamb. The wolf, they're very much in opposition. And how is it going to be led by? How is it going to unite them? Is this heart of a child. One of the things that he said is he rebukes them. When they tried to push him away. Because again, this idea of a physical world, he said, let the little children come to me. Don't stop them from being around me. And that's one of the things I've tried to do, is make sure that little children are comfortable with me. Too often, and I don't know, it's probably my prejudice, maybe my own mind, but I guarantee you, when I was a little kid, I never hung out with a preacher. No, they were scary people. I was so intimidated by them. I was used to, sitting there all quiet and everything, but I would be diddly right out the back, and go and play with the kids or something. But to sit there, And that's why I have tried to make that a part where I want them to come up, and tease me and pick on me and, always want me to pick them up and carry them, come on, pick me up, no matter how bad a mood I'm in, because I want them to understand that I want to be there for them. I want to be that example. And I understand that I need to be like them, how receptive and many of those characteristics they have. And how do we do that? And some of the simple ones we're going to look at as a child is one of the fundamental things that we see with a child is humility. Humility is one of the most important aspects that we need to have as a child. And so when we look at a child, the humility, they're dependent upon us, aren't they? They are so dependent upon us to feed them, to clothe them, to teach them. And I also want you to think about, from the parent perspective and looking at children, that we understand it. We're a parent. And so as we bring and we see this newborn baby come into this world, and you're changing the diapers, and you're burping them, and you're watching them grow and fall down and bump their head and get boo-boos and stuff, that we understand. The first time they fall and hit their head, they think the world's over. Everything is catastrophic. This is the end of times. They lose a toy, and you might as well, it's Armageddon. It's no more toys. It's never going to happen again. But we as parents, we know. We understand. And that's the way God is. God looks at us and goes, well, come on. It's not the end of times. You're fine. But there's still that part of that humility and dependence that God is saying that we need to have upon Him. And trust the fact. That's one of the hard things to get across to a child, isn't it? Sometimes is to say, I got you. I got you covered. I'm taking care of it. And learning that dependence. And most of the time, children aren't thinking about it. They understand that. They have that humility with you. And that's why, it's so important that Jesus said that whoever humbles himself like a child is the greatest in the kingdom. It's not going to be the one with a PhD. It's not going to be the one that goes out and can sit there and serve free meals forever. It's not going to be the one who can go and do so. It starts with what? With the heart of a child, the humility, humbles himself. And that is where we run into problems. When we think about it, pride is one of the worst things we have. And it is the most dangerous thing we have. And it was one of the very first things that Jesus taught on the Sermon on the Mount. Look at what he said in Matthew 5:3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It's not poor financially. We talked back before, when we were looking at the songs of Moses and the Lamb, talking about how Moses had led the people out and he had brought them out from delivery of physical bondage. He had provided for them food, physical food, manna. He provided for them physical water, and that was the Moses that led the children of Israel. But the Lamb was one that was going to bring them something different. But even today, we live in the time period where we get to enjoy the Lamb, the period of being in the spiritual kingdom and all these other things. But what do we want? We want a Moses. We want a Moses that will feed us, a Moses that will lead us, that will sit there and be on top of us and give us water and solve all our physical problems. But the poor, what is that relationship? Because none of us want to be poor. None of us want that. It's a struggle. It's worrisome. We always say we want more money. And I guarantee you, and I try to tell that to people, young people all the time, it doesn't matter. You make $9 an hour, you're going to spend $9 an hour, 90% of the people. And you're going to say, if I only made 10, life would be so much better. And then you get 10 and you're still broke. And then I remember when I got a big pay raise, and all of a sudden I go, wow, life's going to get really good. Guess what? Even after that huge pay raise, I'm sitting there going, I'm still struggling. The bills go up. And for some reason, and even to this day, I still want to feel like, well, if I just had a little more income, I could be at rest. But, that's where pride comes in. It's the opposite. Pride is something that steps up and says, I can do it. I can do this. And it separates us, and it starts to cause us to feel dependent on ourselves and nobody else. And that's why the contrast between, like what Jesus was saying, it's what's easier to get into heaven. It's not easy for a rich man to get into heaven. And it's not because he has money. You know, a lot of people go the extreme the other way. They go, well, you see there, he wants Christians to be in poverty. No. You see, the thing is, if you have a lot of money, the people who are in power and they have reached that level, they have become self-dependent. And that's what I call a little g God. You become self-sufficient. And if you'll notice that a lot of the people who are really wealthy and really well-to-do, not all of them, I know some very wealthy Christians, but the tendency is to all of a sudden feel like, I'm it. I got where I'm at because of what I've got. It's my skill set. And that causes this attitude of self-sufficiency that then causes us to push back on correction. And that pride will hold us and hinder us back from that. And that then causes us to then not want to sacrifice. Because I've sacrificed enough. We feel like, well, I give up enough things. But it's contrary to what Jesus even taught. That it was another concept that was difficult for them to understand. When he told them in Luke 9:23, he said there, and he said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily. Crucify yourself. Crucify yourself daily. Not be a martyr. Some people have taken that off into another extreme and thought, well, there were the, people that would torture or whip themselves. You've seen things. It's like that is not what he's talking about. He's talking spiritually. The biggest problem we have is that we don't want to sacrifice. We don't want to give up my time. I don't want to go and encourage somebody. I don't want to serve others. No, and if we're not willing to literally humble ourselves in every aspect of our lives to God, then we're not going to do it for each other. And that's where we break down the family in our church family, our brothers. And that's what's happened in our country. Our country has gotten so selfish that we have lost this idea of sacrifice, this idea that I'm going to put myself last. I will sacrifice and crucify myself needs in order to serve others. Because that's what God has done for you. God has sacrificed everything for us. And the ultimate was when his son came in the flesh and sacrificed his life and took that brutal crucifixion on the cross. And he said the least you can do is every day you get up is to sacrifice that pride. Put yourself down. Because we know that God opposes those who are proud. Why? Because it again is against the spirit in which he created us in. And that's a part of what Satan wants you to do. He wants you to feel comfortable and self-sufficient. As soon as you're self-sufficient, you don't need anybody. You got it. But that's not the way we were created. God did not create us to be individuals. In this age of information overload and all the different things we have, people feel so safe and secure. But you know what? Depression is skyrocketing because people are fragmented. They don't know what it's like to be humble and to serve one another and to be there. Oh, they'll click like on your little meme that you put on Facebook. But are they doing it? Are they truly doing it? And a lot of times you can see it reflected through social media as well, the pride they have. If you start watching somebody's postings a lot, you can start to pick up on the very subtle heart of the person, on how much self-pride they have versus what their photos are posting, their memes are posting. It's been kind of telling. And I really tried to focus on it this past couple of weeks. As much as I don't like Facebook, I'm involved in it and I learn a lot. And I have to be careful. But you can see in a lot of ways people's pride and self-sufficiency. And then everybody else that's watching it feels terrible because everybody else is doing better than you. And it's just that viciousness that we have. And so God opposes pride because it makes you feel like you can do everything. You can handle it. The proverb writer, that Solomon wrote many times about how much God hates pride. Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before the fall. I don't know, if you've experienced it. I know I have in my life. I've had some moments in my life, things that have happened that I thought I had everything under control. A career planned a certain direction, certain accomplishments, and then all of a sudden just yanked right out from under me. And it's devastating, humiliating. And you sit there and you just wonder. I was feeling really comfortable, feeling good about myself, and I thought, well, that's healthy. I'm not being sinful about it. And thinking that, well, I got myself, but there's a subtleness about it that we start to really feel too independent. And we start to forget about God. We start to forget about others. It's not that we cannot accomplish good things. God wants us to do so. But a lot of times, it takes a tragic moment to humble us, to put us back on our knees, to realize what is truly important. And it's easy for me now, at my age, to look back at some of those horrific things that happened to me. And I'm not talking death and destruction and things like that, but some things that I thought I had total control over and I felt so good about, that all of a sudden just disaster. And I'm just sitting in the spiritual dust looking around going, what do I do? And then the humiliation of everybody looking around, thinking, what's going on? What's happening? And how then you have to take yourself and admit your failure. Because everybody else is seeing it. And there's nothing more embarrassing, isn't it? And where does embarrassment come from, by the way? Pride. Pride. You're embarrassed that you failed or something happened, and when you feel that embarrassment flare up, it's almost because, yeah, I don't act that way. I don't have anything on my nose. I'm not, I'm fine. I got it all together. We allow that to come back in on us. And that's why he says it leads to destruction when we allow that. And so he wants us to. Proverbs 29:23, the proverb writer says, one's pride will bring him low, but he who is lowly in spirit will obtain honor. How many times over history we've looked and we've seen people of great stature in different scientific areas or political. How many people have we seen that they're on top of the world? They're like leading and polls and everything, and all of a sudden you find out something happens. And I mean, it does, because, pride makes you vulnerable. Pride causes you to be able to fail to evaluate. It causes you to stop looking within yourself and understanding where your faults are. And this is what I love about Isaiah, about the way he describes this type of a relationship that we have with God and putting ourselves into the right perspective. In Isaiah 66, 1 and 2, thus says the Lord. Now this is God kind of looking down at everyone around him. Now look at it from his point of view. This is what he's saying. This is who he is. And then who are you? And so he's saying, thus says the Lord, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. What is the house that you would build for me? And what is the place of my rest? All these things my hand has made. And so all these things came to be, declares the Lord. So with all that power, then look what he says. With all this ability and all this grandeur, you'd think he wouldn't want to have anything to do with anybody that's less than himself. But look who he sees is the most precious. He says, this is the one to whom I will look. He who is humble and contrite in spirit and tremble at my word. A lot of times, I'll be talking to a Christian and we'll have a discussion. We'll sit there and think about how unworthy we are and how it's frightening in a way that you think of all these, like righteousness and grace and how we're nothing, that I can't seem to get anything right spiritually, constantly and stumbling and falling, or my past, it's so bad that I can't serve God. I'm impure, and that I have no right for God to have anything good with me or any relationship. And God says, that's the heart I want. You're exactly the one I want. Because you at least have the humility to know who you are and what you really are. And when you think about God sitting there looking at it, it's almost like a father looking at a little child sometimes, looking at him going, you're going to take care of me? So I have, we got instant messenger, and since my grandkids are away, so I was sitting there talking on messenger to my granddaughter, and she had taken a pencil and poked the back of her throat, her tonsils. And so she's all upset and everything, and she shows us, look, old Pa, and I go, oh, that's terrible. I said, what are you doing with a pencil? You shouldn't do that. She goes, I know. And then I'm in my garage, I'm fixing to go out mountain biking, and she goes, well, what are you doing, old Pa? And I said, I'm going to go mountain biking. She goes, you better be safe. I'm like, you're the one running around with a pencil in your mouth, So it's some of that it's like the beauty of it and the kind of craziness of it. That, sometimes do we do that to God? We look at God and we're the ones who just jabbed ourselves with a pencil in our mouth spiritually, and then we talk to God and go, God, you better take care of that country over there. Look how immoral they are over there. It's so bizarre. It's kind of so eye-opening when we start to look at those things. The other attribute we see is this sincerity in children. That is almost raw, isn't it? They're sincere. One of the beautiful things about the word sincere in the Greek, it was being used in the New Testament, is it's this idea of a flaw, without flaw. So, for example, woodworkers. This is one that I can appreciate with, and you'll see this, is they'll take a piece of wood and they'll work on it, and if it has a chip or something that's busted out, or you have a piece of furniture missing a piece of wood, what do? You take wood putty and you put over it. And then you can paint over it, or you can put lacquer over it or something. But see, sincerity is without flaw, without cover-up, without cover-up. It's what you see is what it is. Sculptures do it. And that's what they would use this word for, is the idea is it's without a purity or a cover-up. You're not trying to cover something up. It's what you see is what you get. And that with kids, a lot of times what you see is what you get. They haven't been tainted yet. They're very sincere. We have to take them into the bathrooms and comb their hair. Why? Because they don't care. They could wear the same clothes for jillions of years, right? Stinking. And they're like, yeah, they don't care. They'll wear them. But you and I, how long did you spend? Who didn't look in the mirror this morning and try to fix something to make sure you're, like I did this morning? I realized I didn't shave and had to go back, look in the mirror. Because why? Because I don't want to come here and have stubble and somebody look at me and, because what am I trying to do? I'm trying to cover up. We wear a suit, and stuff. We put on appearances because I don't want you to see the real me. I see that sometimes when it comes to social. A lot of times people don't want to hang out with a preacher because they're afraid he's going to find out that he's real. I did that to Joe Griffin. When I came back after I'd fallen away and we were in Albuquerque and I started going back to church, and that guy wouldn't leave me alone. He would call me up, hey, Ron, you want to go get some pizza? Hey, let's go to a movie. Hey, you know why? Because I knew he would find out. He would look under my facade and he would see that I still had some bad language, that I didn't think pure, like I wasn't worthy, and so I had this appearance. I wanted him to see me on Sunday, morning when I say, good morning, brother Joe. Good morning, sister so-and-so. But if you hang out with me, you might hear me slip and say something angry. So we put up, that's not sincere. And I think that's some of the problems, is that not only have we separated ourselves and divided ourselves out to where we won't hang out with each other, but now the only time we do see each other is when we're all dressed up nice and shaved and pretty and combed hair. Don't come over to my house. Oh my, you might see my underwear laying out somewhere. And oh man, I will not open that garage, because if you look at that, you're going to just think I'm a pig. Well, I am. My garage is always tore up. I always try to work on it. I don't always clean my house. I'm going to tell you that. But don't we do that spiritually? And that's what Satan wants us to do. He wants us to put up this false sense of appearance to the world, and that's not sincere. With children, see, that sincerity is so important. And that's what the Apostle Paul said about love. In trying to commend the Christians there and tell them this idea, don't put up that, good morning, I love you, brother. Don't say it, do it. It's easy to say I love you, but it's really hard to do it. Words are cheap. I've always heard that. You've heard that. And unfortunately, sometimes that's what we put up. We'll say it kind of like, we want you to think that I do because I said I do, but then I'm never there for you. I don't ask how you're doing because I might find out you need something, and then I have to ask, can I come and help you? See, that's that insincerity. The sincerity of a child is going to be out there. We're going to allow ourselves to bring down those guards, and that's going to be humility, because then when I bring down and I'm sincere, you're going to look at me and you're going to see some flaws that I have that I need to have corrected, that my pride will be gone and allow me to know I did something wrong and I need to correct it. Otherwise, I'm just the fool going down the road thinking everything's fine and lovely, when it's not. And it's not. And so I won't allow correction because my pride steps in. I'm not being genuine because I'm hiding from you what's really going on. But children aren't that way, are they? So you see how when Jesus says, unless you become like a child, you can never be a part of this kingdom. This lesson kind of bugs me because I see so many ways that I'm still failing to do this, that I've allowed myself to become conformed to behaviors that I think, well, everybody else is doing it this way. And that's with children. Children don't care which way, what's the right way, They just take care of it. They just do it. Joshua, the great leader that he was, in all that he did, he was very similar to like Moses, having to put up with people that were just constantly in rebellion and false worship and trying to keep them spiritually guided. And at the end of it, you finally see him just kind of lay it on the line and talking. And it's not about the fake worship. It's not about just showing up at church, showing up with your sacrifice. It was about the heart. It was about the legitimacy of your emotional connection to God. And that's what he challenged them with. In Joshua 12, 24, 14. Now, therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in what? Sincerity, without flaw, without covering anything up. Who you are. And in faithfulness. Don't put on a fake show. Isn't that exactly what the Pharisees were doing that Jesus had to battle with? What did he say about praying? What did he say about worshiping? What's one of the greatest parables about the Pharisee in the temple praying about the poor tax collector and God, dear Lord, thank you that I'm not like that guy. I tithe twice a week. I do this. I'm so righteous. And there's that poor, contrite, tax-gatherer, worthless person to a Jew crying out, Lord, I am unworthy. And what did Jesus say? Who went home justified? The one who had all this knowledge and put on this insincere, proudful attitude, or the one that knew exactly what he was and opened himself up to God? And that's what we have to decide. You need to understand. Watch out for the insincerity that you may have in your lives as you serve God and you serve others. And understanding that insincerity is tagged in right with that pride. Those very things that we don't see in children teaching. And I think it's one of the most important aspects that we overlook. We look at all these other things that we should be doing as an adult, and we forget that those attributes need to be childlike when we execute what we need to be doing. Because then it's just a false front we're putting out. And that's why I always say, you can come to church all the day. You can have 100% attendance and then miss heaven. And you're going to be like those that are going to stand there on Matthew chapter 7 when Jesus said, and on that day, many people are going to say, Lord, Lord, did we not do all these wonderful things? And he's going to go, who are you? I don't know who you are. Because why? They were proud and they were insincere. And everybody else thought you were going to make it to heaven. If they would have been a yearbook, kind of like in high school, you would have been voted the most likely to get in heaven. But that's what the world saw. Isn't that exactly the same thing when the children of Israel picked their own king? What did they pick? They picked a very proud man who was arrogant, insincere, It was disastrous. And then God picks a little shepherd, no-name boy that's out in the pasture that even within his own family doesn't have a whole lot of value. And God said, that's my anointed. This is a man after my own heart. It had nothing to do with his perfection because we know he had a lot of them. He said, blessed are those that are pure in heart. Not perfect, but pure. It's the purity and sincerity that when we come before God, first and foremost, we're pouring ourselves out. Because just like a child, just like my boys, and I know you've seen it, you could sit there and have videotape of the kid getting into the cookie jar, taking all the cookies, and then you talk to them and they'll go, oh, not me. I didn't get those cookies. And God's sitting there going, are you kidding me? Really? Here's the video. Look, that's you. You turned around and grinned in the camera. I mean, I got everything about you. That's you. We lifted fingerprints. That's you. And then sometimes we're like, I don't know. It's been faked. Somebody doctored that up, obviously. It must have been my brother because he's always doing stuff like that to me. He doctored that up. It's fake. And we just like, pure is, you're right. You see that change in children. It's like a corruption because initially they don't hide it, you know. You sit there and say, I took the cookies. Yeah. Why'd you take them? Well, I was hungry. And you're like, okay, good. Thank you. But there's something about when they get older and we become an adult, no, we'll defend it, won't we? No. Because why? We don't want to be embarrassed. We don't want to be corrected. And then we become insincere. The next attribute that we see is this one, to me, just tears my heart up sometimes. Is their ability to forgive. A child's ability to forgive. You watch children. You know, you see them playing. In one moment, they're like banging each other up. They're screaming and crying and yelling and said with tears. And, you know, it's like horrible. And the next minute, what are they doing? You look out the window, they're like, they're best buds. You almost want to go out. I don't do it. You don't want to. But you almost want to go out and say, don't you remember he just burnt down every toy you had? He did all these horrible things to him. They don't even remember it. And as parents, some of the biggest failures that I've had as a parent that I've done to my children that haunt me to this day, my boys don't remember it. And they love me anyways. What? You still love me? Don't you, sometimes, I'll bring it up and I'll say, well, I said this to you one year or when you were little in elementary school or something. They go, I don't remember it. What? We've all done that, haven't we? And the child still loves you? This is one of the most important aspects because as we grow, we become so tainted, don't we? We say we forgive all the time. We'll say, oh, I forgive you. And you heard this one. You have heard this one. I'll forgive, but I won't forget. Then you didn't forgive. See, what we try to do is we try to say, well, emotionally I'll detach. But you see, the fact that you just said, I will remember it means you're going to remember the accountability of it. You're going to still hold on to it. I got into it with somebody because of a situation, and it was ironic because I was actually doing a sermon on forgiveness. And this person was close, and we had this situation happen. And because I would not socialize with them afterwards, I got a lecture from somebody that's not a Christian. I'm serious. Saying, you, Ron, of all people, should know how to forgive. I was like, I've forgiven them. And I have no ill thoughts when I think about them, but it does not mean that I'm going to go hang out with them anymore. It does not mean that I'm going to continue, to have that. Yeah, it's over. And when I think about them, the first thought isn't, oh, he broke my car. Or he didn't pay me back. Or every time I see him, I go, oh, I remember that. Oh, that's okay. Well, I forgive you. You're letting go. If you think about it, if God tells us to forgive and forget, then God couldn't have written the Bible because he wouldn't remember what David did with Bathsheba. So we know it's not about total elimination of a memory. What it's about is about like a child. The child moves on. They get over it. And I hate to say this, but I'll tell you what, I've seen some of the worst forgivers that were Christians. Christians! Oh, outwardly, absolutely, I know, I forgave them. But you watch them interact. I think of the church at Corinth, and I'm just overwhelmed at how corrupt that church was. And to think, first off, who would ever place membership there? If you read the letter of Corinth, the first one, you'd go, no way. Matter of fact, I'm going to post it on Facebook and Twitter. Don't worship with that group of Christians. I mean, he blasted them for things they were doing. And one man, so bad that he was actually having a relationship with his stepmom. And Paul told him. He called him out on it. And they corrected it. And then in the second follow-up letter, he told him, he goes, okay, now it's done. The man repented. Forgive him. And I know what he was thinking is that you've accepted him back, but are you talking to him? Are you hugging him? Are you loving him? Are you bringing him back? Are you treating him as if nothing happened? And it's ironic that a lot of times we can have somebody that has done something a lot more horrific in the world, and we'll get past it. But if it's a brother or sister, and sometimes it's insignificant things, but we hold on to it, and it creates a little bit of a barrier. It does. It just kind of keeps us kind of pushed back. And that type of forgiveness is a part where we need to look at as a little child, bringing back. Paul is correcting them and trying to understand the differences. He says, brothers, do not be children in your thinking. So, in other words, don't be immature about your knowledge of God and how you act as an adult, but be infants in evil. This is where it gets crazy. It's like, well, what do you mean infants in evil? Don't look for things that are broke. Don't be evil intense. I don't know how many times. It's so easy to try to think of somebody's motive and what they did to you or what they're doing. We impugn that on them. And that's the thinking evil. Instead of looking positive and saying, don't try to put an evil motive. Maybe it was a bad thing, but you're trying to... the big one is everything's personal. Somebody may have a bad day. They may say something, and all of a sudden we take it personal. We think that, we're thinking evil. And that's what we have to be very careful about, is that idea. Be mature. Be knowledgeable. But watch what you're trying to impugn with an evil heart, because you're going to look at people and you're going to come across and just impugn things on them that you don't know is really in existence. And ultimately, what did Jesus say about forgiveness? We want it, don't we? Everybody wants forgiveness. We want forgiveness. And ultimately, we know without forgiveness, we will not get into heaven. We almost expect that as a part of our contract for salvation, right? Is that we're going to get forgiveness. But look what he says. If you do not forgive others their trespass, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. If we don't forgive others, if we don't get this down, then we need to understand our own forgiveness with God as well. The last one is trust. The trust that children have. Sometimes, that you just see, they don't run around worrying about Dad, how are we going to pay the electric bill? Mom, the milk's running low. I was just checking outside. We need to make sure we got a problem going on with the water faucet out back. Sometimes it's frustrating because they look like they're just living oblivious around you, don't they? They just run around and everything's going on, and you as a parent sitting there looking at the bills, you're looking at the refrigerator, you're looking at the house falling apart. And the kids, they don't worry, do they? They just kind of go around. And sometimes you want them to, but there's a part of that purity. Look at the freedom they have from the anxiety. That's exactly what we need to understand, is that we have a Father who is taking care of us, that we can have that confidence in. And children have that trust in adults, in grandparents and parents. That we see that. It's a vulnerability to a point, isn't it? It's scary sometimes when you see. And then what do? Why do we think it's scary? Because we've seen what the world does to innocence. Not God, but we see what the world does. And so we set up a barrier. We push back. And we have that. And this is why another part of that idea that you can see a child. I can almost see this when Jesus is saying this, that what you can see as a child. Not being anxious about your clothing. Why are you anxious about your clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow, how they neither toil or spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? But all those anxieties, we allow them to shape us and to warp us, and to cause us that anxiety that the Father goes, look at nature. When I go out into the desert, we've been in a drought for so long out here. I can't believe anything's alive. I mean, we live in a naturally bad water situation. I mean, we might get 7 inches of rain a year. I think in Alabama you get 52. Down south you get tons of water. I tell people we get 7 inches a year, and it's like, you must live in the Sahara. But you go out there and you look at the life. There are mesquite trees that I've been riding 20 years out there. There's one that we would always look at that was dead for 15 years. And I use it as a point of reference because I'm exhausted. And I know if I could just make it up there, I can take a rest. And I would see that dead thing year after year after year after year. And then one year, after a little bit of rain, I'm riding along. I can't find it. I'm like, oh no, where's it at? I'm looking for it, and I get up right there. It's bloomed. Beautiful. Green with little flowers on it. That thing had no leaves on it, I'm telling you, for over 10 years. You dig down in some of those arroyos, and there's water there. You look right now, you go out, and I've gone out, and I've been taking some pictures, because it's just amazing how dead it's been. And yet all of a sudden, the life, the rabbits running, the little mice running around, and all the life that's out there. And God says, I'm taking care of that. Do you not think that you're more important? Do you think you're less important than that? If I'm taking care of all of this, and you are something that I have created in my own image, why are we so concerned and allow anxiety to wrap us up? Spiritually, the Hebrew writer also helps us to understand. He says in Hebrews 4:16, he says, let us then draw with confidence near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. That's the thing as well as a child a lot of times. That sincerity, that humility, they'll come up and ask you some crazy requests, won't they? They're not afraid. But when they become an adult, they're too embarrassed between pride, insincerity, because they don't want to admit something. But a little child, they come up with confidence to you and say whatever they need. I think that's an aspect that we have to understand. He says, you can come to the Father with confidence. And don't shirk back. Because when is it that we need it? He says, when we have that time of need. So as a little child, there's so many things that we can learn from, that we need to take ourselves back to and remember the importance spiritually that we need to have as a child. But the biggest one, I think, as well, that starts out is that humility. That ability to be humble with ourselves and not fooling ourselves, and knowing that pride is keeping me away from being corrected. People that I've seen that have an extensive knowledge about Scripture that will sit there and hold on to that because they are not going to allow themselves to feel like, I don't know something. And that is their biggest downfall. The Pharisees, of all the education they had and all the legal minds that they had, even the Apostle Paul, as brilliant as he was, it was one thing that stopped him until that road to Damascus was pride, from understanding that the first and most important step is to humble ourselves before the Lord and keep that way, so that when the truth is presented to us, that we won't push it away. And so this morning, that's what I'm asking you. Have you been pushing the Lord away? Have you ignored some of those attributes that we need to have in order to be able to be reconciled with Him and keep that beautiful relationship and allow Him to come as a parent and love us, protect us? But it starts with those characteristics of a child. that humility, that sincerity, that ability to trust and to forgive. If we're here with you, if you're here with us this morning, we can help you in your relationship. I hope that you'll take this moment to evaluate yourselves and be humble and turn to him with confidence, knowing that he will be there for you to answer your requests and guide you in the way of salvation. So if anything we can do to help you this morning, let us know while we stand and sing.